we have come to the third of today's 3 compelling sessions. And this one is really interesting. Well, they were all really interesting, let me just say that. That sounds like they weren't. The why, the what, and the how we achieve climate sustainability in academia. You all know, you've lived it, we are living it, has encouraged, if not demanded, a rethinking of working modes, working practices in all sorts of sectors and domains, including academia. So in practice, this means that researchers are investigating more and more the role the academic system can play in mitigating greenhouse gas emissions, and of course the potential for a new, I don't know, a guidance, a governance, a framework to conduct more climate sustainable research. I think you would all agree that achieving this transformation absolutely cannot mean compromising on research quality nor on international collaboration. Now, led by its member, Die Junge Akademie, the German Young Academy, ALLEA publishes in May this year the report Climate Sustainability in Academia. And we are going to present the key conclusions from the report and then have some responses to that, and then discuss some ideas and particularly some best practices for moving towards climate sustainable science. This session does bring together 4 fabulous speakers. So let's see, there, it does actually work. I will say more about these 3 when they join us on stage. I will just say a couple of words about Astrid Eichhorn, who's going to be giving a framing presentation. She is, I wish I could say this, a theoretical physicist. I genuinely wish I could sit next to a dinner party, Astrid, and tell someone that was me, and focuses on the fundamental building blocks of matter, space, and time in her research. And in 2019, she became Associate Professor at the Center for Cosmology and Particle Physics Phenomenology in the University of Southern Denmark. She is also chair of the ALLEA Working Group Climate Sustainability in the Academic System, so she's absolutely the right person to be framing this last session. So could we give her, please, a very warm round of applause while I invite you to the stage. Thank you. Tell us, well, you're going to be giving, anything else? You're going to be giving us sort of a synthesis of the main points of this report.
Yes, and the main point about the report really is that in view of the climate crisis, every sector of society needs to transform, and academia is one sector of society. It's not exempt from the need to transform.
Thank you.
So it's an absolute pleasure and privilege to talk about climate sustainability in the academic system here. I'll be drawing on the work of the working group, of the ALLEA working group on that topic, that has just last week published its report, which is available online. And before I jump right in, I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of the members of the working group for their hard work, and also the invaluable support of the ALLEA office and of the Office of the German Young Academy. So I will have 3 key messages for you. The first is that the academic system is currently not climate sustainable. However, change is currently starting. Individual stakeholders are taking first steps to becoming more climate sustainable. And beyond those first steps, there are many options for action which are available right now for all stakeholders to become more climate sustainable. And I will be expanding on those 3 key messages now. The context of this is the climate crisis, which at 1.1 degree warming that we are experiencing at the moment, I think for all of us has moved from being an abstract threat to something that, in the increased frequency of extreme weather events, actually affects all or most of us in our everyday lives. And in the context of the climate crisis, the academic system is playing a very important role, because obviously academia is part of the solution through research, education, and evidence-based policy advice. However, and the second aspect has been much less in focus of the debate, is that academia is also part of the problem through the emissions from its own operations. And to make the second point, I would like to highlight a few points of data and examples from the report. In order to interpret that data, we will need some form of reference frame. We will need some form of guiding numbers, and those we can take from the IPCC report. It estimates that there is a budget of, quote, remaining, unquote, emissions for a high chance to limit global warming to below 1.5 degrees. That is 300 gigatons. That is a very abstract number, but you can break that down to what that means per person per year until 2050, and that's 1 ton. Now, this 1 ton you shouldn't think about as an extremely strict boundary, but rather as providing you with a guideline, with an order of magnitude to estimate whether you have an action that is much above that, then that is not very climate sustainable. If you have an action that is significantly below that, then that is climate sustainable. So think of this 1 ton as providing us with a sort of order of magnitude in order, which allow us to interpret the data from academia. So we'll keep this 1 ton in mind when we now look at examples. And in the report, we look at those stakeholders that make up the academic system as a whole, as well as its framework conditions. And I will not be highlighting data on all of those. I will focus on 4 key examples, namely universities, research institutes, funding organizations, and conference organizers. And let's start directly with the universities. What I'm showing you here is a sample of 25 different European universities. You can see the greenhouse gas emissions per employee in tons of CO2 equivalent per year. And then you see how many universities fall into a given bin. And you can see, comparing to this 1 ton, a lot of them are significantly higher than that. But you can also see that there is a significant spread within the different universities. In part, that has to do with the fact that universities have different profiles, for instance, different degrees of internationalization and different amounts of academic flying. But the more important reason why there is such a spread actually has to do with the fact that the universities in light blue down here, they actually, in their climate reports, only account for emissions from electricity and heating, so-called scope 1 and 2. Oh, apologies for that. So-called scope 1 and 2. Whereas universities, which you can see here in darker blue, they account or try to account for emissions comprehensively. That includes so-called scope 3 emissions. They can come from the supply chain, they come from business travel, they come from buildings, they come from cafeteria food, they come from a variety of other sources. And so presumably these dark blue universities give us a more accurate picture of what the emissions of the university typically are. So the takeaway message here is that that is at the moment significantly beyond this guiding number of about 1 ton. Now let's look at research institutes where we can look more specifically at those emissions that are coming directly from research activities. And I'm picking the example of astronomy here, not in order to blame this single discipline, but just because that is actually a discipline from which data is actually available. What you can see here is an estimate that comes from Australia, and then below an estimate from a German astronomy institute. The emissions, the yearly emissions per researcher, 42, 18 ton, both significantly above the 1 ton. And you can also see the composition of those emissions. A significant fraction comes from flights, but also there's a significant fraction that comes from electricity. And the interesting thing about that is that among the emissions from electricity, a vast majority comes from scientific computing. So here we are seeing an example where research activities very directly lead to quite high CO2 emissions. Let's move on to funding organizations. They, of course, produce emissions in their own operations. And if we're looking at an international funding organization, then those emissions might be tied, for instance, to interviewing candidates in person. There's data from the ERC, which results in about 1 ton per interview that is being conducted in the selection. However, that's only one part of the emissions tied to a funding organization, and there is actually an important data gap, because no funding organization that we are aware of in writing our report reports or even tracks the emissions from the funded research. So there is a very significant data gap that we are facing here. And finally, let's move on to conference organizers. I think it's no secret that flying to an international conference results in greenhouse gas emissions. There's a lot of data for different disciplines, for different conferences, which agrees very much that on average, there is typically 1 ton per participant per international conference. Of course, that average doesn't include that short-haul flights contribute less, whereas the long-haul, the transcontinental flights, those make up a bigger share. And now if you think about the fact that a researcher might not just attend a single international conference per year, then you can see that there's a problem with this 1 ton. Of course, during the pandemic, we have all been exposed to virtual conferences, and those have a lot of potential in cutting emissions. Estimates of reductions for virtual formats range from 94% to anywhere above 99%. So to summarize the examples that I showed you, they support this key message, my first key message, that the academic system is currently not climate sustainable. So then what does it actually take for climate sustainability? Well, so far in the way that our research culture operates, we are not taking climate sustainability into account. And that means what it takes is a change in culture. And a change in culture means changes in individual behavior, but also change in the framework conditions, in the norms, and in the incentives. And the key message that I have here is that individual stakeholders are now taking first steps towards such a cultural change. And I would just like to highlight 3 different examples here. The first is a change that is actually simple in the sense that it doesn't require change in behavior. And this is a change that can be easily instituted in a top-down way, where university management can decide to install green energy on campus that can lead to quite significant emissions for a given university. The second change is a bit more tricky because it requires behavioral change, and so therefore a simple top-down strategy may fail, and instead strategies that actually include researchers and consult with them that are more successful, and that's developing a travel policy. And here I'd like to highlight a best practice example actually from Switzerland, from the ETH Zurich, where management has decided that a travel policy needs to be developed, but each department did individually develop their own goal by how much greenhouse gas emissions from air travel should be reduced, and they involved the staff at the entire department in coming up with that goal and also in deciding how to achieve that goal. What that strategy has resulted in is a very high buy-in from employees, and already in the first year after being enacted, it resulted in 10% drop of emissions from air travel. And the final example I would like to give is a change that is based on our experience during the pandemic, where I think we've all learned that part of our physical mobility can actually be substituted by virtual mobility. Not every single meeting, not every single committee meeting or PhD defense or seminar talk that we use to fly to or travel to does actually need to be an in-person event. Some part of that can be substituted by virtual events, not everything, but a part of that. So now coming to the future, what is next beyond those first steps? And here I have my third key message, that there is actually lots that can be done at the moment. There are many options of action that are available for all stakeholders in the system. And we try to list these in our recommendations in the report. And those recommendations you will find are quite a lengthy list. And the reason is that we didn't just want to provide overarching principles and general guidelines, but we did want to provide specific actionable steps. Now, when you read those recommendations, you might find a lot of things that you find very obvious. And that is because in order to become more climate sustainable, the academic system doesn't need to reinvent the wheel. It just needs to implement a lot of those ideas that are already out there. So what I would like to highlight is 3 recommendations that are relevant for all stakeholders in the system before I then move on to the individual stakeholders. For all stakeholders, we recommend a mix and match approach to meetings. So meetings can either be in person or hybrid or online. These different formats have different challenges. They also have different positive sides. And for each given meeting, there might be a good reason to hold it either as an in-person meeting, to hold it in a hybrid form, or to hold it online. So there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution, but we are asking all stakeholders to consciously reflect for a given meeting which format is most suitable and whether something that used to be in person can equally well be substituted online. And I think what is clear is that a part of our meeting culture will change to a virtual culture. And here it's an important recommendation that we need to improve our virtual communication to make it more successful. What do I mean by improving the virtual communication? First of all, that is an improvement in technology, so the software and the hardware that we use. But it also means improving our communication skills. So we all know that reading body language when you see somebody on a small Zoom square is more challenging. So we need to learn how to deal better with that. We need to adapt the way that we communicate so that it works better in virtual formats. And lastly, we also need to adapt the formats. We probably all have experienced that virtual coffee breaks on Zoom don't work as well as in-person coffee breaks because we simply took something from an in-person format and transferred this online as is. What we need to do instead is think about formats that are suited to the online format, things which make use of the capabilities that we have online instead of simply translating what we used to do in person. So here we already need to develop, learn, and also experiment. And the last recommendation for all stakeholders is that it's important to base your action on a solid evidence base. So I highlighted that currently there are some gaps in the data, for instance, incomplete climate reports by universities or non-existent climate reports by many other organizations in academia. So in order to develop actions which really have an impact, of course you do need an evidence base so that you can figure out what is the most significant share of emissions, where is it coming from, how can you reduce it, but then also setting those goals and being held accountable works if you make that evidence base public. However, it's crucial to not stop at publishing a climate report because just writing up a climate report does exactly zero to reduce your climate impact. So those are the 3 recommendations that we have for all of the stakeholders in the academic system. I would also like to highlight a few selected examples for individual stakeholders. And you can see the list of stakeholders here, and I will not be reading the whole list of selected examples. Instead, I would like to ask everybody in this room and also everybody who's joining us online to put themselves in a box. So you might be involved in university management, or you might be a member of an academy, you might represent a funding organization, or you might be leading a research group or a research institute. So please take a few seconds to locate which box fits you best. And next I will be showing some selected recommendations in each of the boxes, and I will stop speaking for 15 seconds to give everybody the chance to read the recommendations in their box, and I will resume speaking after 15 seconds. So here you go. All right, so I hope everybody had a chance to read and think a little bit about that specific recommendation. You might have noticed that one stakeholder that is absolutely crucial in the academic system was missing in my list, and that's the individual academic that probably most of us in this room actually belong to. And this is because I would like to highlight a point for individual academics. The academic system is special in that it is to a high degree self-determined and much less determined by external forces and stakeholders. We as academics actually determine the framework conditions in which we operate. For instance, in our roles as university managers, as presidents of academies, as research group leaders, as institute directors, as members of committees, as referees, and so on. So in all of these various roles, we shape the framework conditions of the system that we operate in. And so for individual academics, it's absolutely crucial to consider all of the various roles that you have in the academic system and which of those roles actually gives you leverage to change the framework conditions. So with this, I would like to wrap up and just reiterate my 3 key messages, which is that the academic system is currently not climate sustainable. However, individual stakeholders have been recognizing this and are taking first steps towards climate sustainability. And beyond those first steps, there are many options of action available right now. There's lots of low-hanging fruit to pick, for all stakeholders to become more climate sustainable. So thanks a lot for your attention. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you. And just to make the point, and when you just said there from a moderator's perspective who went through quite a change with COVID, when you talked about the different platforms that are out there, I will absolutely say that there are some phenomenal platforms that do their absolute best to replicate, this networking. I know it doesn't replace it, but, when you said, be prudent, cherry pick, there are some amazing platforms and there are ways to orchestrate events that keep them very punchy. And I know because I've written various documents for the Commission on this, and I've gone through quite a journey and I know what works. So if anybody needs to know what works, you are absolutely welcome to email me because I have moderated on a plethora of platforms and helped people to understand. And that's not for me. It's not for me from a work perspective, just if anybody wants any help. I do know there is stuff out there. Let me just ask you a follow-up question. I think I know what your answer is going to be, but I'll put it out there anyway. This transition to climate sustainability, so much of it sometimes it's kind of based in this problematic challenge, but I mean there are positive side effects, there are potentials, right? And we should not forget those, otherwise it's hard to move forward, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And I could just quickly name a few examples, but I think that there are probably many more positive aspects out there that we need to keep in mind. The first is virtual meetings are much more globally inclusive. So we've seen this during the COVID pandemic. There's also data that shows that in particular early career researchers, but also more senior researchers from the Global South who don't have the financial means or for visa reasons cannot attend in-person conferences. They can be included in virtual conferences, and that I think benefits the entire research community. And then also there are other positive aspects, just to name an example. If you don't have to travel to every single meeting, but some of them are online, you do actually save a lot of time that you might invest in potentially doing your research or just having some time for work-life balance. Some other aspects where you save, for instance, electricity in order to reduce your carbon footprint also cuts down on your electricity bill. So some things are also connected to economic savings. So if we just look at this transition in a more positive way, instead of viewing it just as a challenge, I think we can also recognize that there's a lot of potential for other aspects of the academic system to improve. And I could go on, but I will stop.
No, you can, and feel free. I mean, you're going to be seated in the living room in a moment, and there will be other points to make, but let me actually ask you this second follow-up question because it's specifically linked to the recommendations, and then I'm going to be opening the door for your fellow speakers to do some initial responses to those. They do concern, and you articulated that was written very well, you said some next steps that concern everybody, and then, for individual stakeholders to make their choices and to think and to take action. So where does that fit into the general journey of climate sustainability? I mean, it's not going to solve everything. What are we looking at in the next few years? How do you see that dynamic?
Yeah, I mean, of course, making the academic system more climate sustainable will not solve the whole issue. But I think what we discussed this morning, trust in science, this is really where there's a key interplay between reducing our own climate footprints, not viewing ourselves as a special sector of society, but just as one sector that is equally as important as many others. But when we also want to say this is a really urgent crisis, but we don't act on it, we are the ones that generate the knowledge, but we don't act on it, then how are we expecting that message to come across? Right? So I think this is really crucial, that we can set an example to communicate the urgency, and that will lead, hopefully, to more change in other sectors of society as well.
Okay. And in the light of that, you're not going to be very happy with what you have in your hand there, are you? Given what we're talking about? No. Okay, so do you want to take a seat? And can I invite Dr. Leonard Bircher and Martin Niessens and Dominique van der Straten also, and I'm very sorry if I did some mispronunciations there. You can say your own name shortly. Everybody says it's fine. It makes me feel worse, because it makes me feel they're accepting that I've butchered their name, which is not something to be proud of. Okay. So here we go. I think you know the drill, and I think you know by the energy you have, those of you in the room and those of you online, if you have a question, keep it beautifully short. Don't ask it at the last minute, and let's see how far we get. Let me just say a couple of words. So, Dr. Leonard, I love it, Leo Bircher. Can I just call you Leo? Can I read yours too, in the same way that I wanted to read about Astrid? Obtained his PhD in astronomy at the Max Planck Institute for Astronomy, working on thermal infrared interferometry, of active galactic nuclei, galaxies with supermassive black holes that actively accrete matter and shine brightly. There we go. Who'd have thought? Who wants to sit next to him at a dinner party? I actually so much do. I mean that. Seriously. Absolutely. Yeah, you want to come? We're all going to sit next to you at a dinner party. But you're a permanent staff scientist at Leiden Observatory working on the development of the thermal infrared camera METIS for the European Extremely Large Telescope, the largest in the world, and currently under construction in Chile. Who knew that? I think a lot. Would you know? Yes? Okay, I love that. Somebody says, yeah, I knew that. Why are you asking, Katrina? Yes, very good. And very important, I'm just going to say you co-founded a grassroots network, Astronomers for Planet Earth, because there was a heat wave at an annual meeting of the European Astronomical Society in 2019. Is that correct? Do you need to say something about this?
That is fully correct, yes. That was the moment where we all realized that this is both affecting us and that we might be part of the problem, actually. So.
Okay, so that was the bing moment. Yeah, okay. You can actually introduce yourself, I think, and then you can, I think it's nice, because we had this chat, didn't we, online beforehand? No, that's for you, my love. That's for you. For you, yes. Because when we were online and we met, you were sort of all saying, well, I'm not sure why I'm going to be on this session. I think it's this reason. I think you can best articulate why you're here.
Okay, I will. Thank
Marta,
you.
go on.
So I'm Mark Nissen, professor of social economy at University of Louvain, not so far away from here. But the reason I am here is not because I'm professor of social economy, but because I am vice rector in charge of sustainable development at University of Louvain. And I think it's important, this is the first time that in the board of the university, there's a person fully in charge of this topic. Because it's not only, I'm not in charge, of education, research, blah, 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 and sustainable development, but my main mission is to implement sustainable development strategy at the university. And this has been a key choice and very important, because when I open my mouth at the board, it's about speaking about climate sustainability. Not only climate sustainability, but SDG sustainability. It's very important, I think, to open the different goals. Of course, we know very well the climate urgency, but we need to have a systemic view regarding development and sustainable development. And so it's not only about climate sustainability, about social justice, about biodiversity, about gender equality. And we need to develop a systematic thinking regarding these different goals.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I love the way you said the research, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
I love the way it's though research, blah, blah, blah. I hope we haven't offended anybody in the room. I'm only teasing you. Absolutely. Research, blah, blah, blah. Let me come to you, please, Dominique. So you said the same thing. You're a professor at Ghent University, research director of the Laboratory of Functional Plant Biology. So, you're a specialist in... Your interests encompass ethylene metabolism and its interactions, as well as vitamin metabolism and crop biofortification. I want you at my dinner party as well. But why are you here? Tell us.
So I'm also a member of this academy, the KVAB, and as a member of this academy, I have been initiating a Thinkers program on sustainability of technological innovation. So this is for sure one of the reasons why I was asked here, but first I didn't know what the reason actually was, and I thought maybe they chose me as a random scientist to be on the panel.
Okay.
I actually also work on effects of climate change on plants.
Okay. All right. That is, going back to that word humility, I think we have come to the third session and we have a huge demonstration of humility there, which unneeded humility. Now, I'm going to give you all a chance in just 2-3 minutes to respond. Can I just let the audience know and remind you of some of the areas we will discuss so maybe we don't overlap in your responses? Some of the things we'd like to look at in this last session is kind of how much is known about the climate impact Because you're saying there's some individual stuff going on, but that real systemic change, we're not, you know, that knowledge. And why is it so important? Well, you touched on that in a very, very nice way at the end. Who are the key stakeholders for achieving it? Kind of what are the next steps? What steps should they take? Of course, we need examples. Bring us some examples, even ones to avoid. Happy to have the things that don't work, always good. Happy to have the things that are good, low-hanging fruit, something further down the line. What are the challenges and opportunities, so the unintended consequences in the transition to climate sustainability? And, you know, if you could wave a magic wand for one action to bring about that systemic change in the academic system, what would it be? Don't have to answer everything. And I liked it, Leonard, I'm going to come to you on this because you are prolific on social media. How can we better communicate the urgency of the climate crisis to the wider public? We'll come to that eventually, but I think it's a really important one still to get at the nub. Yeah? So first of all, do you want, now you've got the mic, do you want to respond to what you heard from Astrid first? Leo. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I want to congratulate, first of all, the ALLEA and you on this wonderful report. I've actually had the pleasure to read it in full because I came here by train, so that's one advantage, right? I had lots of time. And I think there are so many important points, and the one most important point that I'd like to you emphasized it very beautifully, is that the academic system is part of society, it's no different, and we have to show the urgency by acting and by leading the field here. So that, as you said it before, this is so beautiful, and I think this is the main message that this discussion hopefully will bring forward.
Yes.
And yeah, I mean, just to emphasize a little bit more the astronomy background, as you said, you know, you want to sit next to me in a dinner party. I mean, yes, so of course, as astronomers, we have the privilege to study the most fascinating objects in the universe. I mean, actually, in 1 hour from now, there's going to be a press conference showing probably the second image of a black hole. So after this session, you can watch it.
You're running out the door.
Yeah. But we also study exoplanets. Right? We study so many fascinating subjects, and we have this view on the Earth that not many perhaps have in their day-to-day lives. So we know that there really is no planet B. I mean, this is an astronomical statement, and we should make it. We should make it in our communications. We are so, as astronomers in particular, we are so visible in the public. We give, you know, pub talks. We give lectures, we give open house days, we go to star parties and all these things, and we should just make that message. We don't even have to connect it in the most obvious way to sustainability every time, because people get bored, but just say how lucky we actually are to live on this blue marble, on this planet. There is no other, and even if there was one, we could never get there. So this story is, I think, what we should bring forward much more.
We should also give that message to Elon Musk, the last bit of it, I think. Okay, can I come to you? What did you, I don't know, did you come by train? No. Yes. Oh, you did as well. So had you read the report on the train or before? Let's see.
I would like to have a quick reaction to the nice presentation of Astrid and this very important report. Yeah. If I come back to the last slide, I'm in the box of university, of course, and I can say that we implement the 3 lines, but it's not enough. It's not enough. And I think because, of course, we are institution in the society, but specific institution of education and research. And because we are institution of education and research, we have a moral duty to think and to act regarding this climate urgency. So it's about the Green Campus, and I think the focus of the report is about Green Campus, and I can come back to the question of mobility. But I would like to say a few words about research and education, because the core mission of a university is education and research, we have to advance the program regarding students and research. A report is just published today in Belgium, and I will just name the title of the report because it's an important title. How to train the student of higher education to think and to act for transition. So we need to train all the students in philosophy, in economics, in bioengineering, whatever, but to be able to think and to act. And one observation of this report is quite, I don't know if it's impressive, but we have a long way to walk. Less than 5% of the course in higher education in Belgium deal with climate and environmental issues. 62% of these courses are given in the faculties of science and applied science. Of course, that's very good, but we need other faculty to be involved too. And lastly, 63% of the program do not contain any course linked to these topics. And so, I mean, this is the fact. And so these are common responsibility to move from this situation because we train the next generation.
Yeah, and I think you had there was some, yes, whoever you are, sir, you were that very invested in that comment that came there, I see. That resonated with you very strongly. Right, let me turn to Dominique and ask for what particularly did you notice, what really resonated for you, what comment do you have on the report? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kat. First of all, I also would like to congratulate Astrid and her colleagues for this report, which is really timely, very important. What was striking me when I read the report was the fact that there was in 1990 the Talloires Declaration. Talloires is a small place in the Haute-Savoie in France, where Jean Mayer, who was a former president of Tufts University, was calling upon a meeting with 21 other universities who signed a declaration stating that universities should be world leaders in developing, creating, supporting, and maintaining sustainability. In 2017, approximately 27 years later, 500 universities had signed that declaration. Today, we are 32 years later than the Talloires Declaration, and I was telling myself, well, this is shocking. Are we any better than politicians? Talking, 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 and not acting? I think, therefore, it's super important that this report is there today, and I hope that with this, we will initiate real action. I also would like to follow up on Marte's comment, because I seriously think that we need better education in this topic, and that should be at all levels, starting from primary school to universities. At the level of universities, I think that there is a need for a global bachelor course, first bachelor course, where students actually are receiving information about the effects of climate change, about climate change as such, but also about their own impact. And I think this would really bring change, because those students that we are teaching today are the teachers and parents of tomorrow.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I also think it sort of gives you the tools. I mean, you know, there is the collective action, there's what comes from the, you know, from the policy makers, but there's also the individual. So in the face of what is unrelentingly feels very stressful and frightening, it gives you a certain agency to act at an individual level. I'm going to just try and structure this, if I may. Because I'm going to come to you in a moment, because we want to hear the examples about Green Campus, mobility, and so on. Just to clarify, because of the importance you've stressed, super quick, how much is known and why is it not known?
So,
in the academic system, yes, obviously, about its impacts.
So what is known is really, in some sense, anecdotal evidence, because it's individual stakeholders. There is nothing that is really systemic across the whole academic system. There are also no agreed upon standards. Each university just publishes a climate report, if it does, according to its own ideas of how a climate report should look like, what it should account for. The reasons are difficult to speculate upon, but maybe if I'm trying to be a little bit critical, it might have to do with the fact that we might have to give up certain privileges. We are part of that fraction of society that flies significantly more than others. And so having a critical discussion about how can we change those things without compromising research quality, without compromising on internationalization, that's a tough discussion to have. And so if you collect more data, then you're inevitably faced with the necessity of that discussion.
Yep.
So maybe that would be part of the reason why there isn't more data.
Thank you. Let me come to Leo, if I may. We heard there from Astrid at the beginning why she thinks it's important that the system becomes sustainable and who some of the key stakeholders are. Let me just come to you for, other reasons. We talked very much about credibility. For me, it's kind of a no-brainer. Why is it important? And who are the stakeholders that can achieve this? What sort of steps?
So I think Astrid had a very complete overview of all the stakeholders. I'm not going to add any to these, but perhaps highlight a few. I think some very prominent senior scientists could be real role models if they, for example, reject flying to a conference far away because they say, okay, look, this is just not acceptable with my carbon footprint. Or hold conferences in a way, push conference organizers to allow online access. That would be an important asset. I think also funding organizations could play a much bigger role. We heard this a few times already. There's no funding organization yet that has published their own, the carbon footprint of the research they fund. They could just have a very simple box. It doesn't have to be a lot of red tape, just a simple box in the funding application saying what is the carbon footprint associated with the research that you're proposing. And that would just get people thinking. It wouldn't, it wouldn't have to be a lot of work, but just get people thinking about this. But one small comment I'd like to make to the question of how much do we know, I would answer that question as enough. I mean, there's of course much more that we could know. Scope 3, yes, there is more details, but we know enough to know what the low-hanging fruits are. We need to build up renewable energy, and we need to reduce flying.
Thank you, and you're nodding. I will come to you in a moment. Let me come to you. So let's hear about, something concrete about what you are doing. We heard about green campuses. We also heard about some of those areas: heating, electricity, cafeteria, data storage, supply chain, travel. Tell us just in a nutshell what you've been orchestrating there, and how difficult has it been, or have you had sort of easily brought people on board?
It's challenging, but important. First step is important to have evidence-based data, and so we have a carbon footprint of the university, and there are plenty of information in the report, and I was not surprised to see the source of carbon footprint in the university. Energy and mobility are the two main sources. Energy, yes, we need to heat, to need lighting, and so as a traditional enterprise, of course, we need to reduce this source of energy, and the strategy is quite easy to think, not easy to implement, is to reduce. So it's all the question of shared infrastructure, and you know that space is very important in university, and so it's a political, debate, huh? How important is space, and private and public space. We need, of course, to renovate the buildings, and we know how to do it, but we need the money. And of course, we need to decarbonize and to have some kind of green energy. So it's quite easy to think, not easy to implement. Okay. Yeah. Second source is the mobility. In my university, as my university is not in the center of Brussels, the main source is about commuting on an everyday basis. And this morning I was not here because there was the bike days at my university, which is an initiative to foster the use of bike on everyday basis. And of course, mobility linked to travel. And we know that scientific travel is at the core of our mission in the university. And so the main message, and it's very clearly explained in the report, is internationalization and physical mobility are distinct concepts. Of course, internationalization is part of the DNA of the university, but all the question is how to think about this dimension, trying to reduce the physical mobility. And so we have at the University of Louvain a green chart of mobility, which in fact is a chart which I saw at University of Ghent, which is quite easy. 3 steps. First, before traveling, you must ask yourself, do I need to travel? Maybe to go for a 2 hours meeting in Madrid, it's possible to have a virtual meeting. Second step, We live in Europe. There are plenty of green cities. It's very easy to take the train. And then sometimes we need to fly, and if we do, we compensate. It was a very sensitive debate in the university, and all the question was the following: do we need to be, is it a compulsory charge or a voluntary basis? And we decide, after a long debate, to choose the voluntary basis, but on a collective basis. So it's not every professor who decides, I will commit myself to the chart, but at the level of research group or institute. Okay. And what was important is the discussion on the table, looking at all the scientists, young and older scientists, debating about the importance of traveling, about alternative way. And so the discussion was, I think, as important as the fact to commit to the chart. And today's 80% of the institute did decide to commit themselves to this chart.
Okay.
But it has been very sensitive debate.
Okay, thank you. And I want to come to you because you were being, but first of all, I'm just going to nip in because I could see Leo's face there, so I think you want to say something.
Yeah, I wanted to just briefly react on your statement of the few flights that we do take, we can compensate for. I think this is not a good route to go because there is no scientific basis for this offsetting, right? It's not clear if it works at all. One problem is if you take a flight now, it will release tons of emissions. If you plant a tree, it will take 50 years until it sucks it out of the atmosphere again, if it doesn't burn down before. So there is really no basis for this offsetting, and it's dangerous to some degree because it keeps people thinking we can just carry on doing what we have been doing and just pay a little bit. And I think that's the danger we have to...
No, absolutely. And I don't think in the context you're using it, I think you're absolutely right in a wider context, but you wanted to just come back. Did you just want to say...
I know you're doing it very responsibly.
I fully agree.
You're scared. You're in the middle. You're the only guy in the middle of a bunch of women who are like this. He's like, oh no, you're doing well. You're doing well.
I fully agree. And so the message is to reduce and to replace. That's the first important step. And if we do, maybe compensate, and the money stay in the university to invest in some, for example, the investment of virtual equipment in a room. So it's not compensation in a scientific way. Anyway, there's no scientific way, but just to devote this budget to this kind of initiative.
Okay. Over to you, Dominique. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Kat. There are many things, of course, that have been said already. But I would like to add one thing regarding energy at universities, first of all, and then about travel. Regarding energy, I think it's very important that universities also receive extra funding from the governments because they have to renovate their buildings. And in order not to defer funds that are actually meant for research to renovation of buildings, I think it's absolutely essential that there is extras coming from governments. That's one point. Regarding travel, of course, it is important to a certain level that scientists also have live communication with their colleagues. So I don't think there is anything that can replace it entirely. Nevertheless, I think we have to substantially reduce on that travel, and it's absolutely possible to do that. As Maarten already mentioned, my university, Ghent University, indeed has a charter on that. I also think that, of course, carbon insetting projects are a better alternative, where you actually are compensating with local projects for conservation of biodiversity and local projects for reforestation, for instance. But I do agree that it is important not just to think in terms of compensating it, but trying to absolutely reduce it. I think that it is absolutely possible to organize meetings with your colleagues, even within your country, virtually. When you have a few people on Zoom, the interactions are fairly easy. When there are many people on Zoom, then it becomes more and more complicated.
Yeah.
So from that point of view, I'm not advocating not to do that. I'm just talking about the communication.
Yeah, and also the reflection that's required and unpacking. What does it mean? If we make this change, how do we orchestrate it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because you have to see each other. It's just like virtual teaching. virtual teaching is something I really dislike because I don't see the reaction of my students. And I cannot say, hey, I don't think you got it. You got the point, right? So in a Zoom meeting with colleagues, it's a bit of the same thing. But again, if it is with a low number of people, I think it's perfectly possible. Okay. On the other hand, another point I want to mention is that we should realize we are part of the entire ecosystem, planet Earth. I think we forget that too often. We are just part of the entire system, and that means that we really have to respect our ecosystem and have to teach that to youngsters, to our students, because that's the only thing, that's that consciousness that actually will save humanity. We are in the 6th extinction, and basically we are that one and only species that is capable of eradicating itself.
Oh, that's... We're not going to stop there because that's such a well, it's a valiantly depressing statement, so we won't stop.
It is important to stress.
Absolutely, it absolutely is. I'm not sort of jesting to jest. Leo, you wanted, and then I will come to you, Astrid. Yeah.
Again, just a brief reaction on your statement that live discussions are so important and Zoom meetings can't fully replace them. I would agree at the moment. These interactions we have here, they're wonderful. But I ask myself, how much is this just a lack of technology? And there are groups around there who are studying this. And a friend of mine always makes the analogy that the first TV shows that existed were apparently recorded radio shows because people had no idea what could be done on TV. So they just had two people sitting there talking on the microphone. Of course, that was totally boring. And now there is so much happening on TV. So I think we just started to scratch the surface of what's possible, right?
Of course, I fully agree there. But today, I think it's really still important to meet each other. And minimizing that is important, but we have to keep that balance.
Yeah, I'll give to Astrid and then I come to you. Yes, Astrid.
Just a quick agreement with the balance of formats. I think that's absolutely important to keep in mind, right? It's not about one or the other, it's finding about a good balance. But the point I wanted to pick up on is the question of more funding for universities to renovate buildings. That is important. However, it's also important for universities and other academic institutions to make climate sustainability not just a strategy that stands apart from the university strategy, but make it a core part of the strategy. Because there will be tensions in some decisions where, for instance, going for a more climate sustainable choice will be more expensive. And as long as climate sustainability is not part of the core values of the strategy, those decisions will be more difficult to make.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to come to you and say, had you a comment about funding, and you made a lovely link there. I'm going to come to you first, and then we have a question from a gentleman on this side of the room. So you wanted to pop in there. Yes.
Very shortly, I have a secret.
Look at his face. Look, you're the most entertaining person to have in the middle. Your face says everything. Yeah.
Being in a train is the best place to work.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
No, but I think in Europe, I mean, there are plenty of destinations where you can travel. Maybe it takes some time, but compared to the plane, I mean, you know, it's not a waste of time. I think you can use the time very, you know, efficient way
productively.
Maybe just next idea regarding what Astrid just said. What's important is to think about the university being part of an ecosystem. And so, of course, in the university, we need commitment from the top management to grassroots initiative, and the role of students is very important too. But the role of funding agencies could be very important to develop incentive and to send clear signals regarding the way we are moving in Europe, and so there are plenty of things to do for funding agency. And if you see at the European level, there are some very interesting tips at the Erasmus Plus program. For example, students have more money if they want to travel by train. And we don't have that for example, FNRS or other type of funding agency. And so we need to think about the whole ecosystem.
Indeed, indeed. Can I just come to see if there's a follow-up, and then I will come to you? Yes. Did you want to just pop?
Yeah, so the follow-up is the following. I thought that it's important regarding funding agencies that they would think about restricting travel budgets. And that would be a way to push people, of course, also to think about the consequences and reduce it in a way. Because sometimes travel budgets are astronomous, to be honest, right?
You're sitting next to the right person to say that, as we know. Astronomical. Yes, go on. I like astronomous, though. Astronomous is a nicer word than astronomical. Yes.
I'm not going to comment on the astronomers' costs, but the point about the research foundations or the funding agencies is very important one. Actually, I was part of a small team publishing a paper about the carbon footprint of the ERC, and it's astronomers, so to say. I mean, they used to, before the pandemic, they used to fly in candidates for half-hour interviews. And I just had a quick chat with the president before, and she said they are stopping this now. So that's already very good, but they're still flying in people for the panel meetings. And I think we should also discuss whether that is really necessary. I was also on virtual panels during the COVID pandemic, and I had the impression they worked really very well. And sometimes it can be an advantage if you don't have the personal interaction, you know, because you want to focus on the topic.
Yeah, and good. And just to say, and I will get to this question from Vanessa Moss from Australia in a moment, but we're going to hear from this gentleman first. And it is exactly about this, where the advantages are and changing the kind of the mindset and thinking around it. So I will get to that. Is it okay? Okay, so to you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you. There is a lot of charters, engagements, recommendations, and so forth, but I think the point we're missing is that we need to take individual action and individual responsibility. And by pointing to funding agencies, to university responsibles, and so forth, I think, walking around the difficult thing is that we need to implement all of this. And part of this should result in, or should come from very concrete recommendations, very concrete actions. For example, the recommendation by Dominique I like a lot is that we could allocate every single individual in the university a limited carbon budget, and if it's finished, it's finished, and you can use it for whatever you like. But if it's done, it's done.
Interesting. Can I just fire back a question when you said it's, it's us, it's individuals? I didn't get the impression that it's kind of, we're putting it out there to someone else. It is about that. The two are not mutually exclusive. I mean, I think the funding, particularly issues about the renovations in terms of energy efficiency, I didn't see the two as mutually exclusive, but that was me. I think you both want to come in. Perhaps they can reply better than I.
Yeah, to be honest, I think that we have to work at all levels. But as I said, I really think we first of all have to raise awareness in kids, in teenagers, and in adults. Awareness about that problem is very important to really realize what it is and what your own contribution is to that and how you can solve it, because every individual can do something. That's the point, really. But on the other hand, I think that funding agencies also have their responsibility. It's not a matter of evolving towards an era where funding agencies will ask us when we are writing a project, could you please make a carbon budget of your project? That's not my personal idea about that, because we have to know how we have to use at best the scarce funds that there are. And maybe scientists should, of course, focus on science, while as a human being, they should focus on their place in their environment, on the planet.
Astrid, yeah, I've got a question there, I've got a question there, I've got a question there, and we've got about 9 or 10 minutes. There we go,
Just
Astrid.
very quickly, it's not about either the individual or the framework conditions, it's about both, because what it really requires is a change in culture, and the culture is individual behaviors in a larger system that incentivizes behaviors and that gives norms and that makes certain behavioral changes easier. So it's critically important that it's both that changes.
Okay, I think the question here first, and then we come across. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm Lydia Borrell-Demian, I'm the Secretary General of Science Europe, and I would like to thank all the panelists for their excellent contributions. I would like to myself contribute to this discussion because very relevant to what you're saying, Science Europe, together with CISAR, the University the Network of Universities of Technology in Europe, and the International Sustainable Campus Network of Universities, we have sparked a reflection precisely on how we can act on the climate challenge, on the net zero transition. And we organized a series of events in the framework of COP26. And one of our hallmarks was the launch of a call to action to research organizations, to research and higher education organizations. In that reflection, we have already come into agreement on a series of framework actions that I would be very happy to share with my ALLEA colleagues, which are always ready for collaboration, and would be very happy to engage with ALLEA to take forward one or more of these recommendations. So, Antonio, you are very much welcome to enter into dialogue with us. We are preparing something on interdisciplinary research for the net zero transition in the framework of COP27. Okay. We are now seeking partners for this organization, so we would be very happy to include ALLEA in our plans.
Perfect, thank you very much. I'm shortly going to move there. Can I just ask a quick question on the basis of that? For me, maybe it's hugely complex, as you said. You said easy to make certain decisions and thoughts about how to proceed, harder to implement. This arena cries out for some kind of shared platform of best practices, and it cries out for it, not least because the digital platform itself is a way of, and it's partly in response because the question came in about skepticism about online or hybrid alternatives remains high, but it seems to cry out for that. Isn't this an arena where it would spread quite fast, the best practice examples?
Yeah, I agree that could be an important arena, and that this is also what is necessary beyond these next steps, right? In our recommendations, we list a lot of individual steps that can make a change, but beyond that, really a systemic change is necessary. And a systemic change needs to start with an open dialogue, including all of the stakeholders, to really figure out how do we envision the future climate sustainable academia. And I think for these various platforms at the European level that can organize such a dialogue will be critically important, because otherwise, as Marta said in the beginning, well, at Ghent University you implemented the recommendations we have, but it's not enough exactly. So it's only the first steps, but we need to trigger a broader dialogue and really develop a vision of climate sustainable academia.
Okay, I'm going to take these two questions. I'm going to let you reflect on this. You don't all need to answer this one. I'm just going to put it there before we hear from this gentleman. Vanessa Moss from Australia asks, skepticism about online or hybrid alternatives remains high due to, for example, mixed experience and conference revenue motivations. How can we overcome it, and how can we expedite the necessary changes in our approaches? And I only need 3 or 4 sentences, actual action points for you. But hold that thought, please. Over to the gentleman.
Well, it fits in rather nicely, actually. The point I wanted to make, which has been said a little bit already, but I think bears repetition, is that the reason we need to do this is, well, first of all, because it's the right thing to do, but mainly because it gives credibility to our advocacy. I mean, frankly, we can reform academia as much as we like. It won't really make much of a dent in the climate crisis unless there is significant political action at high level. We need massive investment in renewables, and if we want to appeal for that, we have to show that we take it seriously, and we take it seriously because we act on it. Turning to the actual practice of academia, I think we do need to recognize that in the past we have been very careless with use of energy. I mean, I've been involved with high-performance computing, and it's quite shocking, actually, the way people will gaily burn thousands of CPU hours without consideration of what it costs and the impact on the climate. So it's not just travel. We need to think about what we are actually doing on a daily basis. And the reason we need to do that is because we need to push for political action. I mean, it's very clear that the fossil fuel companies would like nothing more than for everybody to believe it's just down to your individual choices. It's not. It's down to our political choices. So that's the message.
Thank you. And I like the way you said it's also about getting that credibility through our actions. It's not, in other words, it's not getting credibility through what we recommend or the evidence, but actually through our actions. I did see you. I know you're there. Okay. Yes. Thank you.
Well, this is a very interesting discussion, and I really appreciate everything that's been said, but there are a few things that are left out. The major thing that's left out is that ICT does not come free of charge. As you probably know, the usage of ICT has exactly the same carbon imprint as air travel. If you add to that the manufacturing of ICT, we are doubling it. Okay, so that's a fact of the matter. The other thing is that universities are not just faculty. If you take all of the students, there are probably 20 times more students in a university than there are faculty on average, in most places. And what you will have then is you have to consider the travel of the students, not just for Erasmus, but also to go to Vietnam or to South Africa or to some other place. And you have a huge budget of CO2 impact, where the faculty travel is a negligible element. Okay? So we have to look at things that way, and I'd urge you also not to imagine that when you replace a conference where you may be one of the 100 travelers in the plane, so you have actually absolutely no impact on the outcome, or if you're one of 2 travelers, and you compare that to the huge expenditures in video conferencing, and in data centers, and so on, you just have to take the whole balance into consideration and not just focus on 1 or 2 points.
You must always take the whole balance in, and I think everybody wants to reply. I will start with you. Now, I'm giving you, it's 15:03, so we can take another perhaps 5-6 minutes. Can we do that? 5 minutes. 5 minutes only, not 6. Okay, you've heard the man. You need to be concise. There's your mic. Thank you.
Thank you for putting this debate on the table, because we had exactly the same debate at university, and of course numeric footprint must be included in all the carbon footprint. I didn't know, but now I know that a day in a virtual meeting emit less than 1 kilo of CO2 compared to a round trip by plane from Brussels to Roma, which consume 300 times more. So that's so if we compare the emission linked to the virtual meeting and to the plane, of course we have to be aware of the numerical footprint. But what the most important is the cost of equipment. So what's important is not to have a lot of equipment, a smartphone, a PC, and to keep this equipment as long as possible. And so it's important to have this debate, and this kind of information is also a responsibility of the university, is to have evidence-based debate.
Okay, absolutely. Thank you. Over to you, Leo. Yes.
I'd like to add 2 points here to what you just said and in your response. I mean, one point is that yes, ICT also has a huge carbon footprint. I'm fully aware of this. But I think it's different than from flying, because it's much easier to make the emissions go away, right? We know how to use renewable energies to make the energy use of actually running this equipment, the carbon footprint of running the equipment close to zero. Not exactly zero, but close to zero. We know how to do this. There's no way to fly a plane, the intercontinental ones that are the ones that contribute most. There is research on this, but
okay, let him just finish, and then if there's one thing,
in the next 10 years, there won't be a sustainable way of flying. But there are already ways to have green computing. That's point one. And the second point I wanted to make, because you said this one person not taking the flight doesn't make a difference, that's exactly the point that the other gentleman in the audience made before. It's about credibility. We are very public figures, and we have to show that we take this seriously. Sure, there's lots of people who take flights to whatever places, and they should also change their behavior, yes. But I cannot tell them to do that when I just jump off from a plane from Hawaii.
But also, what about collective one-persons? If you've got collective one-persons who've made the choice not to fly, who would have made up a flight, then it does make an enormous difference. So, the individual,
the entire carbon footprint,
the collective of the individual,
is like Iceland or something. So it's
absolutely okay. Over to you, and then we will try and address the last.
Yeah,
Thank you, Dominique.
Yeah. So I think we definitely also have the moral duty to think about our daily activities. And to think about it together with our collaborators on the other side of the world. For instance, there are so many people who are flying around the world to sample, take biological samples in the ocean, etc., you name it, right, to sample. Obviously, you can reduce that by letting your colleagues at that place, that university with which you are collaborating, let them take the samples. Let your colleagues in Africa take the samples, let your colleagues in Asia take the samples, and let them send it to you. That's one way, and I think that definitely also can reduce on the carbon footprint, and it's something that might be a suggestion to colleagues.
Thank you. Astrid?
Yeah, so just to very quickly reiterate some data on virtual versus in-person conferences. So this has been calculated in a number of different papers, and the reductions are somewhere between 94 to larger than 99%. So it's not a reduction to zero, but there is a very significant reduction. However, maybe to pick up on a different point that picks up on the scientific computing that Luc has mentioned, and also on the collaboration that Dominika has just mentioned. So this ties back to what was discussed earlier this morning, namely open science. If, for instance, we share our simulation data more openly, if we share samples, if we share results of experiments much more openly, then not every single research group needs to do the same thing, but can actually pick up on other people's work. So this was discussed this morning will obviously make the scientific system better in of itself, but it's also a way where we have actually potential gains in just reducing the carbon footprint by running fewer simulations, by flying less, and so on. So it's one of those examples where transforming towards climate sustainability interfaces with other ways of transforming the academic system towards a better system.
Very, very interesting. That somebody's got to tweet that. That's absolutely. And let me just nearly come to the end, and I'm sure you will be able to continue this discussion afterwards, but in the interest of time, anything about this skepticism? You know, how do we overcome skepticism and expedite the necessary changes in our approaches? If you want to say something more about how to better communicate, Leo, the urgency of the climate crisis to the wider public, that can be your last word, but do you want to say anything about this issue of skepticism with these online hybrid events? And then I will bring things to a close. It's got to be a 30 seconds. Thank you so much.
Maybe one important thing to keep in mind is that most of us had our first extensive experience with virtual communication and online conferences during the pandemic, which for everybody was a very stressful time, with social interactions overall reduced very, very much with the added stress of online teaching and so on. And so that is a time which is not normal. And that is a time that is very different from a time where most things are running as in-person, where teaching is in-person, where one interacts with people at the university, but where one participates in, let's say, a single conference virtually. So I think this is very important regarding the mindset for virtual communication. Where did we have our experience, and how much was that really a bad experience of virtual communication, or just a bad experience because of the high added stress of living through a pandemic?
Okay. Thank you very much. Or anything else that you didn't get to say and you think is important in the context of this conversation?
Yeah, let's just try to find a way to stimulate the big conference organizers to organize conferences alternating virtually and in person.
Thank you very much. Leo, I leave it to you to decide what you want to, your parting shot.
Okay, for the one shot, okay. Then my one shot would be the most important thing. I think what every one of us can do individually is to inform yourself about the climate crisis, to really know the science about the climate crisis a bit, and then talk about it. This is actually, I'm just reiterating what climate scientists say. Inform yourself and talk about it.
And what do you think is not working at the moment that you want to see differently? Because we need to, and we certainly need to in the context of both COVID and what's happening in Ukraine at the moment.
Okay, the Ukraine war, of course, is also financed by fossil fuels, so I see this connection. But what is not working at the moment is that many scientists don't know the basics of the climate crisis. I mean, when I walk around with this tie, there's enough people also in a scientific audience who don't know what is the urgency that it is showing. And I think every one of us should really know the basics of the climate crisis, really read the papers. I mean, there's wonderful overviews available, and then be able to communicate about it.
I think scientists should read the summary report of the IPCC.
Last word to you, please.
Yes, one sentence is, because we are a university, we need to act. Because we are a university, institution of education, of research, we have a moral responsibility to act now.
Thank you very much. And what has been so fascinating about this conversation is it's absolutely clear how much careful reflection needs to be taken in every area, all of those areas that you pulled up there, from the data storage to the heating, to the travel, to the interviews, to the supply chain. How much careful thought needs to go into how you have those conversations in a way that everybody, you said it was tricky, Kat, you know, that everybody can have a voice there, but the absolute critical importance of mainstreaming so that this kind of ownership of the planet and the way you described it is the norm. It's not the pressing existential weight, it's the norm of responsibility and joy, like you said, and joy at an earlier stage. I think that's absolutely critical, and to walk the talk, but first of all find out what that talk is, because not enough people know, as you have said. Can we give a very, very warm round of applause, please, to these fantastic speakers? Thank you. You did so beautifully. You had the hardest job right at the end of the day. Thank you so much. You are welcome to take a seat. We have just a few closing words. Please don't run away. I promise you online. We do have a few closing words coming now. So here we go. There we go. So we're moving into this more than the twilight part of our event now. We cannot wrap up the symposium without inviting to share with you a few closing remarks the Permanent Secretary of the Royal Flemish Academy of Belgium for Science and the Arts. Of course, this is one of our host organisations, Professor Karel Velle. So let me invite, I didn't know who you were. I was scanning the room, and there you are. Thank you. Shall I put this in here for you?
Excellencies, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. In his welcome address yesterday, the Permanent Secretary of the Académie Royale, my colleague Didier Vivier, drew attention to the question how academies help in transforming science. In the past 24 hours, we were invited to actively listen to inspiring speeches by policymakers, privileged witnesses, passionate experts, enthusiastic keynote speakers who shed light from their individual perspectives on the various relations and interactions between societal challenges and science policy actions. I would like to thank sincerely all speakers to their contributions. At the end of this fascinating but also exhausting two-day meeting, I would like to do three things: make some marginal observations, announce a very important event that shall take place in Brussels later this year, and express some words of gratitude. First, some marginal observations. ALLEA is an inspiring and leading network organization. We are thankful for the collaboration with ALLEA, for the personal contacts, the advice activities, the newsletter, the electronic publications, the position papers, the reports, the vision notes, and the dialogues in front of the coffee breaks. Each one of these publications are all useful sources of information about current issues such as reproductivity in science, open science, innovation, and so on. Issues which all members of the member academies can work on. Needless to say that ALLEA focuses on relevant issues that are also on the agenda of a number of member academies. For example, at the Flemish Academy, a series of lectures is currently being held about climate change and energy, with a focus on the scientific technical analysis of climate change, the consequences of the energy shift, and finally the involvement of citizens in climate and energy policy. On 3 afternoons, experts from different fields of science, journalists and decision makers shall discuss this vast issue in dialogue with interested citizens. And by the way, climate change shall also be addressed in early August during Science at the Sea, a lecture series organized within the framework of the festival Theatre at the Sea that is very popular at the Belgian coast each year. How natural sciences and humanities are contribute in the future to solving pressing societal issues with a regional, European and even global dimension is one of the topics of a joint publication in preparation by KVAB and RB in the context of the 215th anniversary. The title of the book is Serving Society, Academies and the Challenges of a Complex World. ALLEA has repeatedly called for more collaboration and transdisciplinarity. There are sufficient topics suitable for successful bilateral cooperation. But today I would like to warmly call for more structural cooperation between ALLEA and the European Network of Young Archivists. Young Academies, excuse me. That's the European Network of Young Academies, sorry. As we have seen in the past 2 days, young academies are growing, collaborating, and being established as we speak. Young academies increasingly seek connections to their senior academies for joint efforts. From what we have heard yesterday and the day before, I have the impression that their goals are quite well aligned with those of established academies, but their action formats and their budget are sometimes different. We should support the young academies, both within our countries, but even internationally. Didier Vivier yesterday pointed out the importance of transdisciplinarity in the field of science. Allow me to refer in this context to the successful initiatives taken by Belgian academies, such as workshops, publications, performance sessions, with the goal of bringing young artists and scientists together and promoting exchange of expert knowledge, interaction and communication between science, the arts and technology. I would like to seize the occasion of these closing words to draw your attention to the Eurocase conference that shall take place on the 18th and 19th and 20th September of this year at the Palace of the Academies under the auspices of the Belgian academies. For those who are not familiar with Eurocase, the European Council of Academies of Applied Sciences, Technologies and Engineering is an independent, not-profit organization of national academies of engineering, applied sciences and technology from 23 European countries. It was founded in 1992 upon French initiative. Eurocase is one of the 5 European academies of the SAPEA advice system in Europe. It acts as a permanent forum for exchange and consultation between European institutions, industry and research. Through its member academies, Eurocase has access to top expertise, about 6,000 experts, and provides impartial, independent and balanced advice on technological issues with a clear European dimension to European institutions, national governments, companies and organizations. The main topic of the gathering in September in Brussels is technological and industrial innovation for prosperity of Europe. I would like to thank you all for your attendance and for your active participation. The last 2-3 days, I would also like to thank the staff of ALLEA and staff members of RB and KVAB for the excellent collaboration, both during the long preparation phase and the meeting of these past days. You were an amazing team, so thank you so much. And we can applaud our colleagues for their contribution. A particular thank you goes to a number of persons who were in charge of the logistical aspects: Alberto Fardinez Munoz and Isabelle Algrin for RB, and Chris Brosset and Jan Albert for KVAB. Without their dedication, we would not have been able, dear colleagues, to meet yesterday and today. And I also thank the personnel of the catering companies, because these people are sometimes indeed left out of the acknowledgements. And all those who will ensure the cultural program and the musical recital this evening upstairs in the marble room. The cultural program shall begin at 3:15 p.m. In 5 minutes or in 10 minutes, so 3:30 p.m. for the spring recital for cello and piano. You are expected in the marble room on the first floor at 7:30 at the latest. I thank you for your attention and I wish you a very pleasant evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. A last word from me too. Many, many thanks to our wonderful speakers for taking the time and trouble to share with you but a fraction of their considerable brains, very important, and to stimulate yours. It was an absolute pleasure to be in their company. Can I also thank the organising team at ALLEA, not least Matthijs Vleugel. There you are. You should raise a hand because you worked so incredibly hard, so incredibly hard. a bloody pain in the arse organising events, isn't it? They're never, let's just be frank. And your colleague Susanna, I think, as well, Susanna Els, who was also, thank you very much, for helping shape the content, which in itself is a considerable and Herculean task, and pulling together such a fantastic speaker lineup. Thanks to the technical team here at the venue. I was really quite happy not to have a Madonna mic, so good thing. You might have done that on purpose. Of course, a big thanks to the two host academies, the French and Flemish speaking academies, phenomenal hosts, and of course, last but by no means least, many thanks to you, our delightful audience, to those of you who are still with us online, for your attention, and of course, for your smart questions. I know that you must have had a bazillion others, so carry on the conversations. If you've had an enjoyable time, don't forget to tweet, #transformingscience, because without all of you, science cannot be transformed. I leave you with one of my favorite quotes. I quoted this morning when Christian Wopen was here, the Epictetus, we have 2 of these and but 1 of these, for a very good reason, since for me, what comes out the most is the importance of the dialogue and the right kind of dialogue, and I can't see how we can progress in any significant way without it. My other favourite quote is George Bernard Shaw, and that is, the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. It's a good one. Reflect upon it. Until the next time, I wish you all an excellent afternoon, a very nice recital which started, according to you, 25 years ago in the space-time continuum. Have a very, very good day. Thank you very, very much. Recording of this, if you want to watch again online in a couple of days, and pencil in next year in London, spring-summer 2023 for the next General Assembly. That's what I wanted to say as well. Thank you.